Hello, today we're diving deep into LLinusLLove's top 5 most epic hands of 2023. I'm excited to have with me my friend Aleksei Borovkov, also known as Aurora, who not only competes at the highest stakes games up to now 40k, but also has a very deep understanding of poker. This video is a translation of our original content for Gipsyteam forum. Before we start, please hit the like and subscribe button. Your support means a lot to me. Let's get started now.
Hello everyone, this is a special episode of Big Pots, and the hero of our special episode is LLinusLLove's. Sergey Jaser and I met again more than 2 years after the last joint analysis of hands. Hello Sergey. Hello Aleksei, hello viewers. Yes, I have such a very pleasant feeling of nostalgia now. Aleksei and I have been working together for years, probably since 2014, quite a few years. An interesting fact is that we didn't know what each of us looked like, only by voice. Okay, let's go back to Linus. Linus played a lot at the end of 2023. I think Gipsyteam chose the hero of the episode very correctly, because, in my subjective opinion, by the end of the year Linus seemed to have a second wind, as chess players often do. Before that, Linus's entire career seemed to be going very well, and he relaxed a little. I even found myself in some sessions where he played on tilt, or he was somehow more lax, and he also performed very poorly in Omaha, but in fact probably this unsuccessful performance in Omaha somehow motivated him, and for the last 6 months, maybe even the last 8 months, Linus has been just a killer. His playing distance in reg wars is crazy, he holds all tables for a lot of hours. Perhaps now he's even stronger than in those peak years of his career. Let's watch the hand. Here we have the first spot, a full table with a Chinese amateur BTC for sure. This is an ante table, therefore not quite standard ranges. Well, I think that both the heroes of our hand, Victor and Linus, are excellent at playing ante tables, and most likely Daniil will probably be the one to have problems first of all, because the rest of them all have solid experience. And what's Daniil Vasilyev's nickname on Stars? Well, actually he also had the nickname Daniil, he played a lot there at 1KNL. Just Daniil, right? Something similar. Yes, this is very... well, the dude is something like Stefan, only technically weaker. He plays very aggressively. There are a lot of questions about him because he has a very sharp rise. He was literally playing 500 NL 8 months ago. He played 6 max at 500 NL. It takes roughly 4 months and he already loses a 100,000 pot to Linus. Moreover, he does it funny, he plays a lot, wins, then loses everything to Linus. Now he is also not in the best financial shape, as I understand it, because he lost everything to Linus at the most expensive bets again. It looks cool that at 10k, 20k limits, even at 5k, 10k, 20k he really crushes, but at 40k he lost even more than he won at all limits below. Yes, well, let's see what Linus did here. Victor opened from the button, got called by the big blind by Linus. Here a much wider range is to be defended. The rake is very small. Basically we can say it is tournament ranges, which I now know a little better than before, and 5-7 in general is probably the bottom of suited 7s, but in general some 8-5 would be at the bottom of 5s, but I think 5-7 is a confident defense against 2.5 BB. In this hand, it might be interesting to discuss the strategy that Limitless has on the flop, because in general, in 150 BB effective stacks at a table with ante on 263 texture, firstly, Linus should have donk bets. Secondly, in the place of Viktor Malnovsky, you can play very variable. You can use really big bets, often 3/4. You can play medium bets, the same way I do using half of the pot, but Victor, looking ahead, I watched his play quite a lot, especially in heads up, in wide ranges. The wider they are, the more Victor likes to play using small bets, so it wasn't surprising to me that he chose the strategy with small continuation bet. Maybe you can add something? Yes, I'd like to add that this is a board on which the big blind has a big advantage. Taking into account the fact that we are playing an ante table, he has all 4-5 of suit, and in principle I think even without an ante, at the highest limits taking into account the rake, this hand is to be defended. This hand is indifferent to calls 100% of the time, so therefore there should definitely be a donk into this texture, 10 to 20%, and Victor's strategy depends on whether Linus has it. If Linus has a donk bet here, then Victor's cont bet will be medium, and if there is no donk bet, then Victor should cont bet less often, around 30 or 40%, but this is by eye, for example using half of the pot like you and I play this texture. So if play using a third, then perhaps cont bet will be a little higher. Do you think Linus has a donk bet on this texture? Well, he probably has. Again, this is not all obvious because the stacks are 150 BB, not 100 BB. In 100, I'm sure it would be more. Here, in my opinion, Victor, he loves small bets and wide ranges. It's just that, even if the machine shows you that it makes less sense to place a small bet here, it's better to bet more, but in reality, this does not affect anything. You can build a good strategy using almost any bet sizing, excluding some completely illogical ones. In general, to the extent of 1/3 to 3/4. Basically, you can build an adequate strategy on any board, give or take. It will not be very bad. And the wider the ranges, the more important it is to feel comfortable and to manage the ranges correctly. Victor has played a lot in heads up, which is probably why he bet 1/3 here. We probably sound like nerds. I agree. Overall, the main takeaway is that if we assume that Linus is not donking here, we should cont bet tighter than the strategy dictates when he is donking. I think Linus should have a donk strategy here. However, Linus played the check raise here, and Victor faced the classic dilemma. We seem to have a hand that does not have much value on the flop anyway, but against the raise, this is a situation where we already understand that now we are likely to play a big pot with the expected value around 0. We have a beautiful hand, a blocker for an ace, a blocker for a set, some kind of backdoor flush draw. That is, we will have to contribute money to the pot. It doesn't matter how, maybe with a 3-bet, maybe with some kind of bluff on subsequent streets, but we'll have to contribute a lot of money to the pot, and it most likely won't give us a lot of expected value, because we have a bottom pair on a very dynamic board. Therefore, I think Victor wasn't happy to face a check raise here. In any case, this is an easy call, because Linus must have overcard plus backdoor type hands, which he will give up on a turn with. His continuation frequency on a turn will not be so high if we consider all kinds of runouts, because this is a low 6-high texture. It is played with a merged check raise. The big blind must protect many of his vulnerable hands, such as 7s, 8s, the best top pairs, and also check raise 4s and 5s to merge with a certain frequency. Therefore, due to the fact that there will be a frequent check on a turn, our hand will realize its equity even better. Plus, we will receive give-ups. Therefore, in general, we can call with a margin. Well, yes, the call of course with a margin. On Linus' part, there are probably nothing to discuss either. We have a good draw, lots of potential ways to win this spot. We are trying to implement our draw, so to speak. Victor made the call. Here on a turn, in my opinion, is the most interesting part of this hand. Well, for me personally, as a player, maybe even more interesting than many subsequent ones. It is the turn play, because here I wasn't sure, when I first saw this hand, that there was any point in this third of the pot bet, because it seemed like the texture is very dynamic, an incredibly dynamic turn. In general, our value wants to put a lot of money into the pot. It would seem that a third of the pot does not look like a logical sizing. What do you think about that? Yes, I was very surprised too. By the way, all of the hands that I've seen, this particular hand, this particular action on a turn, seems to me the most illogical. Here, in theory, we can use two sizes. For example, an overbet and a small size. For hands like the best 6 axes, 7s and 9s, which we hit on a turn. But let's say I don't play like that. Simplifying and playing with one bet size seems the simplest and most logical solution. Plus, in any case, we have to check widely here. We have to create a check protected. So, I dislike this block bet. Taken all round, we can try to figure out what Linus was trying to achieve. So I came up with an idea. I don't know whether you like it or not, that in fact in this way we can just cheaply, well, we can say this implementation is cheap. Always bet a third of the pot. This is not that cheap, but in general we won't receive many raises because the opponent may be afraid of getting bet 3-bet from us here. Conventionally speaking, he has a large amount of overpairs, and an overpair may be afraid to raise this block bet because it will receive a direct all-in from sets and monster draws from a very large part of the range, against which we will have to play a raise fold, which an overpair does not want to. In Limitless's place we will simply raise very rarely, so this bet may work. We will simply realize our equity, plus we will knock out some floats, some combinations like king-queen with the king of clubs. It may work this way. Yes, this is an interesting assumption. In theory, the frequency of such play from Linus cannot be high in 150 BB stacks a priori, because reshove turns out to be very expensive. But in general, the idea is cool. Indeed, we can single out this bet size if we expect that we won't receive a raise as often as we should when using it. Linus actually plays quite exploitatively. That is, it seems to me that he had some kind of thought when using this bet size. I even had notes that if Linus uses a sizing that seems illogical to me, most likely everything is very reliable there. That is, it rather works the other way around, in my understanding. And I think Linus definitely had some kind of idea here, and it seems to me that most likely the opponent will be afraid to raise us. So we will expect effective pressure for a small price. Plus, we will realize equity up to the end. The hand is actually quite difficult. It is mostly unpleasant for Limitless, because it is hard to play very poorly on Linus's plays. He has an open-ended straight draw, he contributes money. Basically, no matter what he does with his 5-7, be it a check raise, an overbet, a 3/4, a pot bet, you can bet any size in 150 BB stacks and find arguments why this is a good play. On Limitless's side, the hand is much less pleasant. What would you do with the ace-3? We have 2 flush draws on the board, a lot of draws, there are gut shots, open-ended straight draws, 2 flush draws. Our value hands are not very interested in playing with this size. We have better chances to implement our draws without getting raised, but on the other hand, we are still playing against one of the best players in the world, and firstly, our assumption that he won't find being raises should work often enough. Secondly, at the same time, we won't get enough value with our strong hands if we are trying to balance. It is unlikely that Linus plays a super exploitative strategy here, where he has draws in small size and strong hands in an overbet. In other words, a non-obvious difficult spot. But what to do with ace-3? Well, I think we have to call such a bet. That is, we are still blocking the set, we are not bad against draws, we cannot fold against such a small size. No options, it seems to me. Maybe we can raise on the turn. It seems to me that it's not so bad to play raise fold with this hand. We slightly block all in range, some 4-3 of clubs, 3s. Couldn't this be a good option? Yes, I like this idea. We can raise hands like ours with some frequency. Ace-X, 3x. We block sets, put pressure on draws, knock out some T8 with a card of same suit. Limitless chose to call. This is such a... Putting myself in Victor's place, I wouldn't be pleased with this hand anyway. We call not because we have a pair, but conditionally speaking, we will have to use the dynamicity of the structure to our advantage. When something closes somewhere, we will turn our hand into a bluff. When the board pairs, let's say a 6 comes, sometimes we'll play check-check. That is, for complex reasons, it turns out that sometimes we will win this pot. And at that price we have to call, but as I said at the beginning, we will have to contribute a lot of money to the pot, and the expectation from this will be very random. But we can't escape it. Blank on a river. Here we can also discuss what sizing to use on Linus's plays for a long time. It's probably worth thinking, is it necessary to bluff at all? What do you think? We block both draws, that is, if we are going to give up, then I think this hand is one of the best candidates to give up, besides the flush draw itself. So, and another argument against bluffing is the line inconsequence. Again, if we played holistically, with one size on the turn, with an overbet, then we would represent a fairly wide range of hands. And here, if we have both an overbet and a block bet on this board, and we now continue to put pressure on the river, then the value range that we represent is quite narrow and not very plausible. I agree, but here we can find an argument in defense of Linus. We most likely will not have hands that do not block flush draws. It's hard to imagine that we can afford to play a block on a turn with some weak equity. It's hard to even come up with such a hand. All of our hands block flush draws in some sense, either one or another. Or they have a pair and we probably have no right to bluff it. That is, we can win by check-check. And of unmade hands we have, well, simply the bottom of the range. Could there be a weaker hand here? 5-6? No, 5-6 is already a pair. In short, we have the very bottom of the range. But maybe Linus was just bluffing based on this logic. That is, conditionally speaking, I will have value there in this line sometimes. Hands weaker than this will not, but for bluffing all the candidates are more or less similar, because it is difficult to single out. It's probably a little worse to have a diamond in your hands than a club. It might be better to bluff with a club and give up with a diamond card, but this is such a fine line that it's already quite a trifle, that is, it no longer has such a strong impact. We will have opened a straight draw with one card of the same suit. It seems to me on the contrary that it's better to bluff without having a club in your hands, in order to unblock your opponent's club folds. By the way, this is a controversial point. I noticed this when studying tournaments. In tournaments, it is very common that when the average stack is smaller, many more flop 3-bets are played. An interesting aspect appears, which we less often take into account, that blocking a flush draw from the flop is not so bad. Let's go back to the flop. I don't know, maybe you won't agree with me, I'm just going to share my thoughts. Here are some monster draws, some pairs with flush draw, some nut draws. Of our range should go into 3-bet. It seems to me that some percentage of strong equity based on the nut draw or monster draw will go into 3-bet, and almost all of the diamonds that we bet will reach the turn, and accordingly the river. And it may turn out that it is more important to unblock diamonds. Well, this is truly a small thing at all, but in smaller stacks it often affects. But on the flip side, your opponent won't have many combinations of diamonds. Where will they go? Do they kind of check back the flop? Some of them play check back in order to avoid check raises and realize equity. For example, here I will always check diamond over cards, especially Broadway ones, to avoid getting check raised. Maybe, yes. Well, we've switched on the nerd mode now. By the way, on this occasion I propose to rename the rubric, for example, Nerds Around Campfire, because we've already been analyzing one hand for about 10 minutes, but we're having fun. Well, let's discuss the river a little more. Linus overbet the river, and Victor played a bluff catch. Accordingly, it is also a very expensive solution. But here, it's probably intuitive. We're blocking the set, that's kind of good. Ace is also a good card. That is, both of our cards are good. We need to call something. Why not this? That is, on Victor's part, the hand on the river, in my opinion, it's probably even harder for him to choose the right line on the turn. Raise, call, or maybe even fold on the turn. But on the river, probably, if we call something, then ace-3 is probably ahead of a lot of other combinations. And we got to the river, wide. The opponent seemed to have made a small bet. That is, we came out wide on the river. We need to call something. I'd like to emphasize once again that the value range that Linus represents is very narrow. That is, it should be a value hand that bet a block on a turn, like a provocation, and then bet an overbet on a river. That is, he represents a very narrow value range, which inclines us to a white bluff catch, because this is not a very coherent line, not very plausible. Yes, I agree with you, quite an incoherent line. This 1.5 pot overbet on the river is something like if we represent a set, then we can probably bet even more. That is, why exactly 1.5? It's something like, you know, he chose the sizing more or less at random. Well, for some reason it seems so to me. We can just shove with the set and straight. The opponent hasn't raised us on a turn, we can already consider all in. That is, it seems to me as a randomly chosen sizing. It seems that on Linus's part the hand was played a little, let's say, not with the soul. Linus lost this spot. We have an interesting lineup here. As far as I remember, this was the beginning of the year, when Victor, Kevin and Linus played several sessions in a row. Probably worth noting that this hand was played during a period when, it seems to me, Linus was out of shape. He was playing very laxly. He was playing Omaha simultaneously. So this hand is probably from the category don't repeat this even at 100 NL, although probably at any limits. Well, by the way, it's interesting. I would argue I like this hand much more than the previous one. But yes, let's not get so far ahead. Let's see what happened. Linus limped Jack 2 in a 150 BB effective stack. Kevin, aka Tex here, raised 3.5 big blinds. Well, with 10-9 we should probably raise with full weight here. We have no options. Jack 2 is probably also obliged to defend. I think that this is a rare preflop moment when every played hand ends up at full weight in the branch they've chosen. The King Jack 8 texture in 150 effective stacks. Seems like it should be played with large bets. Maybe you have something to add? Well, Linus accordingly always checks. I agree, we play a polar strategy, we have a complete nut advantage here, so he chose a pot bet size. Cool, I like it. Low frequency, because we have a polar isolate range. When we isolate, we are full of all kinds of suited garbage. Plus we have a lot of medium hands here. We want to play a polar strategy and check a lot, and protect our check. So here, the solution in fact is not obvious already on the flop with Jack 2, in my opinion. What arguments do you have for calling this pot bet? Well, against pot bets in wide ranges we cannot fold second pairs. I'd say we cannot fold most of second pairs. I would fold exclusively jacks with bet kickers, like Jack 7, Jack 9, which have bet outs. So with Jack 2, I think it's a great pot bet call against an aggressive, balanced opponent. I wouldn't fold Jack 2 here. And what would you do if, well, I don't remember, you probably didn't play that much with Kevin in those years. Here he is somewhat similar to Dude 1 in strategy. That is, preventive folds work well against him. He contributes a lot of money on subsequent streets. Probably if we somehow build a strategy against a specific opponent, as I see it against Kevin, we probably want to preventively fold somewhere a little. And then with Jack 2, in my opinion, calling is no longer necessary. Well, it depends on how you build your strategy. I like your remark that against opponents who really like to mash the gas, we can overfold right now. And our hand is suitable for this. Well, you have an opponent who contributes more money on the turn and river than is necessary in theory. That is, he disperses standard deviation more, the average pot size will be larger. This does not mean that he does it as a bluff or for value, it's just a balanced strategy, just more aggressive than it should be. How would you play this type of combinations? Would you try, as I've suggested, to preventively fold them, or would you go for expensive call downs and not be afraid to call down to the end in the right situations? Well, listen, it depends on how well I understand my opponent, how well I researched him, and how many notes I have on him. If all I know about Tex here, for example, is what you've just said, that he likes to mash the gas and plays well-balanced, give or take, and I don't know anything about his weaknesses, then I like to preventively fold right on the flop, as you've suggested. Accordingly, we can overfold the middle pairs right away. Let's think about which ones we never fold. Ace-Jack, we never fold, the best Queen-Jack, Jack 9 we fold, Jack 7 fold, and we are left with Jack 6 to Jack 2 suited. Well, I don't know, maybe folding everything is too much, because if he plays balanced on the flop, he will burn, let's say, our EV. Well, we can fold, I don't know, Jack 2, Jack 3, Jack 4, Jack 5, so be it, the bottom of our defense. Well, yes, Jack 2 will have such a pleasant deuce hit, it will be very implicit. I think Kevin will contribute a lot of money to the pot if deuce comes. As Sergey has noted correctly, Jack 7 is much worse here because it has worse two pairs hit. Worse not only because a straight arrives, it's worse because the opponent won't contribute so much money for thin value with aces, with ace-king, as he will to do it if deuce comes. Therefore, probably calling with Jack 2 is able to have positive EV, even against such a big bet. Blank turn, everything as we wanted, unexpected overbet, on the turn everything is basically the same. No, the overbet is very expected. Well, yes, unexpected in quotes. The turn decision is the same in complexity as the flop, probably. Well, here on the turn we have candidates for folding right away. That is, these are jacks that go with a queen, with an ace. By the way, it seems to me that we also cannot fold at least half, we must, well, I don't know, maybe a little less than half, but we definitely need to continue some middle pairs, and ace-jack looks like one of the best candidates, and jacks with non-obvious kickers, which roughly speaking do not block draws, that is without a 6, without the 10. We probably have the best jack, with the exception of ace-jack. Probably jack 2 is really the best. There are jack 2, jack 3. Jack 4 is already a little worse. Basically, we don't even need him to bluff the river. If he folds on the river with a flush draw or with combinations with one club, this call will probably have positive EV due to implied odds that deuce gives. Due to the fact that we will receive a check-check on a blank. Probably due to this, if the opponent has enough bluffs on the turn, then calling will probably have positive EV. Maybe this hand is even better than some king with a 6 or 7 kicker that blocks gut shots and open-ended straight draws, but that's not for sure. Top pairs here, even the worst ones, are indifferent. There they most likely have a different EV. We block top pair, that is very good for calling the turn. For calling the river, this is probably not important, but for calling the turn, blocking top pairs is still very important. His line pot bet flop over bet turn. He doesn't have many top pairs worse than king-queen left on the turn, and his main value range consists of hands like jacks, jack 8, king 8, king jack, aces. That is, our king, he blocks king-queen, part of ace-king, relatively speaking, but I'm not sure how important this argument is. On Kevin's side, would you always overbet the turn with 10-9, or maybe randomize somehow, or would it depend on blockers? I think we should definitely check part of our draws, part of open-ended straight draws, part of flush draws, 100%. Instead of them, it's great to bluff some hands like overcards. 5 hits are also great bluff candidates. His hand can always be checked. I like to check backdoor open-ended straight draws after we bet them on the flop. Well, this is just a simplification of the strategy that is easy to remember. If we have a backdoor, we can play check back. We knock out Linus's ace-10, of which there are quite a few combinations. We are cleaning up some implied odds on straight for ourselves. It's a little nice. Probably based on this logic, I would also haven't been able to resist overbetting the turn in this hand on Kevin's spot. The more correct strategy is to combine your different draws so that your strategy is harder for your opponent, less readable, conditionally speaking. Oh yes, it is easy for us to overbluff because we don't have that many value hands in terms of combinatorics, but we have a lot of all kinds of draws on this texture. Kevin was bluffing with the bottom of the range. I think that in this hand Kevin was always going to bluff his hands on blanks. What is also important in such games, the audience may be interested in this. Sometimes, even if you think a bluff has no positive EV, give or take, but it is still better to bluff the bottom of the range in order not to show cards to your opponent at the showdown. Because here Kevin probably wouldn't want to play check back with 10-9. Therefore, even if Kevin thinks that the bluff has 0 EV, maybe even a little negative, I think he will do it just so that the opponent does not understand that Kevin is never bluffing here. Well, Linus was not afraid to call down to the end. How do you like the river card? For me, calling the river is more understandable than calling the flop and turn, because on the river it is really much better to have a jack in your hand than a king. It seems to me that this is an example of an indifferent bluff catch. That is, our hand has neither arguments for folding nor arguments for calling. Indifferent bluff catcher, if we think that Kevin will execute his bluff to the end, we call him down. It's interesting, by the way, to ask you about this. For example, newcomers often ask me, let's say, in a situation where we have indifferent bluff catchers, basically we already have the second hand, which, in this hand, we can say that both opponents played well. That is, no one did anything wrong. Probably we have some questions for Linus about the flop and turn play. It could have been played differently here. There are probably no questions for Kevin in general. It's unlikely that his range was played very poorly. Where is the advantage in indifferent bluff catchers? Has it often happened to you when you are playing reg wars that bluff catching seemed to have a positive EV? I wouldn't call it often, because it will mean that we have a huge advantage in this reg war, and such situations are very rare. I wouldn't use the word huge at all. Let's say situations when we have a significant advantage in the reg war, they happen rarely. There cannot be many situations like that when playing with strong opponents, but they definitely exist. Could it be the situation that just happened in the last hand? What do you think? Because you've just said that this line of Linus seemed to you incoherent. Could it be the hand where bluff catch would always have a positive EV in your opinion? Yes, it could be. It is a good example of a bluff catch where we can call basically any hit. We can probably spend a little more time on this. This is quite an interesting part. It may be even more interesting than the hand itself. The fact that the bluff catch here, in my opinion, a priori cannot have a positive EV, because look at Kevin's line. He played the correct pot bet, the correct overbet. That is absolutely standard combination of sizings. Well, maybe pot bet is little non-standard, but in 150 BB it is standard. An absolutely standard combination of sizings, and on such a river he also has in fact only one option, all in or check back. Basically you won't catch him anywhere on the range here. And it's also hard for Kevin to overbluff, because he would play all the value hands in the same way. If he plays a pot bet on a turn, then all the value will also go along this line. This cannot be a strongly positive bluff catch. Sergey has correctly noted that there you can try to catch Linus on an illogical combination of sizings, because it is not clear what he has come up with. It may only be a cheap implementation of the draw, and on the river he decided, let's just bluff with the bottom of the range. A bluff catch can cause either a very negative or very positive EV, because the branch that Linus has chosen is much less standard. In theory, there it could be that Linus never has any value here, because value hands bet all in on the river. By the way, he should play like that, a standard play with value. I've looked, I don't deceive you, is all in on a river. Accordingly, in this sizing, there may only be a bluff. This is an interesting aspect of how these two hands differ. I'd like to make only one remark here. Here, in fact, you can overbluff on the big blind, because there are quite a lot of potential bluffs. And the value range, well, it is not as wide as it seems. Yes, it seems that 6-7 has hit on the river, but if you look at combinatorics, then all the same, if the big blind doesn't check enough flush draws, open-ended straight draws, gut shots on a flop and on a turn after the flop bet, then there we can easily overbluff. However, strong players like Tex here understand this, so I wouldn't count on some easy positive bluff catcher against him there. Either a little positive bluff catcher or a near zero one. It is probably an interesting question. If, for example, we assume that the opponent always bluffs all missed draws without clubs, does it turn out that he is overbluffing or not? 100%, yes. If he bets all these hands on both the flop and the turn, then we can, as in the previous hand, call with any pair. However, as Sergey has also correctly noted, this will not happen because a strong opponent will mix these draws on a flop and turn. Even if we start from the fact that a person gives up with all hands with a club, so as not to block a flush draw, and bluffs without a club, it will still be an overbluff. Yes, simply because the value range is too narrow. Nice call from Linus. The third hand is a heads up with an amateur. Broken Home is not a professional player. Well, by the way, at that moment, as far as I remember, this is also a pretty old hand, and at the moment Linus was not in the best shape, and he refused to continue playing heads up with Barry Sweet. One might say he gave up. Again, he performed unsuccessfully in Omaha, therefore we probably cannot say that against the strongest player in the world. However, now probably we can again, now Linus is back in shape. I'd also like to make a small remark. Often people rate not very correctly high stakes regs and overestimate the influence of variance when they think that some guy shows up, starts crushing, and then he stops crushing, and they see this as evidence that he was simply lucky at some point, and then variance returned it. Actually, a super important aspect. Using the example of many players, the example of big blind bets, the example of Linus, whom you've just remembered. I remembered big blind bets because we met in person not so long ago and also talked about this topic. High stakes players have periods where they just either burn out or they stop being interested. It's not completely related to variance. What do you think about that? Yes, I completely agree, poker is a very complex game. A more telling moment than the result is, relatively speaking, who holds the tables in prime time. Well, the amateur opened from the bottom, Linus defended with 5-2, the flop was 10-5-4, Mr. Broken Home plays a solid bet. In general, we probably have two options here. The more standard one is to call. Well, probably a raise doesn't look unusual to anyone in 2024, given the opponent's large sizing. Conventionally speaking, this is a semi-bluff merge raise. I call it raise plus check fold. That is, we knock out the opponent's garbage, and on some suitable runouts we will make an expensive bluff. I definitely wouldn't check raise against an unknown fish, but it seems to me that due to Linus playing heads up with him, he had some reads on him. Maybe an amateur gave himself away with the sizes, because if we consider a fish in a vacuum, then their increased size is a value heavy size. Therefore, I would not consider a check raise here. It seems to me that we would not get enough fold equity. Linus chose check raise, got called, of course. In my opinion, a check raise is more or less normal, even against increased value size. Against increased amount of value in the range, the raise is unlikely to be very bad, simply because we have good backdoors. That is, we can look at it from the other side. In this way, we will boost the game. The next raise will get paid. For complex reasons, it may still be an okay raise. I guess we cannot blame Linus. I think he had some kind of reads on this player. This was hardly their first hand in life. Plus, you see what kind of hand he had. He bet a polar size, essentially, with a merged hand. That is, this also gives information about his game. Yes, he probably used large sizes before. Maybe he has one size. Anyways, we check raised. On the turn, we probably don't have many options other than checking. There's little point in bluffing. Well, we can knock out. Of course, there could be some kind of 200 IQ bluff, where we get called by ace-king, ace-jack, ace-4 and knock out pockets from 6s to 9s, but so to say, it may not work. Therefore, here probably Linus always checks with this combination, well, as I see it. The opponent played check behind. A good river for Linus. His share of the pot has grown decently simply because the value of the second pair has grown. Whereas we can already hope for a check down with ace high, maybe for a split with some other 5s. Win against the 4. Here I think we play check for sure, and Linus was playing with the expectation of a check down. Received a very thin value bet from his opponent. It can be noted that broken home read the opponent's range quite well here. That is, he realized that he was always ahead. This is actually not so obvious, that is, here on average the opponent would prefer to check. What can I say? I would check either, because there could be a 10. Therefore, it's worth noting that here broken home understood quite well that he was ahead. Instead of calling, Linus played a check shove. Linus wasn't afraid even more and did a 3-bet. Not an easy hand to analyze. One opponent did very thin value bet, the other apparently read a thin value bet because Linus refused to call. In general, here you can consider calling on a river. The texture is quite safe, an amateur can bluff here. If he ends up with a hand like 7-8 or 6-7, maybe with some backdoors with a club, he can bluff here. The sizing is normal. That is, with 5-2 we are blocking a little some 2-3, but this is not so important. That is, in general, we have a good hand for simply calling down an amateur. It is unlikely that anyone would have condemned Linus for this call, but Linus understood something and chose all in. What do you think Linus represents? Well, slow play, set only. Well, maybe queen 10 rarely, but I think not. But as they say, it is not we who make the decision now, but the amateur, and amateurs do not play this game in order to fold. When we represent here a very narrow range against an amateur, I'm not sure that this is the spot where we make a lot of money. If we don't have information on him and reads that he has something obvious in this size, that for example he would have pot bet his strong hands, that we would have bet all his missed draws on the turn, so to speak, and not checked back, because if he checks them back, really, why not call? It seems to me calling here may well be profitable on a river. We need reasons for such a push. Perhaps Linus had them because he played with this mate. Mr. Broken Home understood the situation very well, that is, he realized that he was ahead, found a value bet and did not lose this thought, because you can understand that you are ahead and get a check shove and still throw it away. And here he didn't seem to give up on his idea and brought the hand to the end. It turns out that here we can definitely say that Linus played poorly, because if we get a bad call from 8s on the river, then our bluff is very bad. That means we wouldn't even knock out a 10. Well, of course, yes, that is, we didn't knock out this combo. Then what could we knock out at all? As you can see, this is an indicator of such a very exploitative hand, where Linus probably made a rough assumption that he was behind on the river and couldn't call. Thought that he should either give up or try to knock out a thin value bet. Tried to knock it out, it didn't work. This is where we see the downside of the exploit game, where your assumptions don't work.
This is it for part 1. If you enjoyed this format and want to see second part translated, please let me know in the comments. Until next time.